In this video, I'd like to introduce you to one of Monkey Tool's killer features, which is the ability to import a Power BI model back into Excel. So you'll notice here I have a Power BI model in front of me in Power BI Desktop. This is saved as a pbix file. It's got a whole bunch of tables. We've got a bunch of relationships in here. We've got a bunch of measures that have been created as well. The one thing that's super important to understand about this particular model is this metrics table here, unlike all the other tables, was not created with Power Query. It was created by clicking Enter Data right here. So this does not create a Power Query in order to build this table from scratch. Okay, so that's the one thing I want you to keep in mind as we go through and we take a look at the demo that we have. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to minimize Power BI Desktop and I'm come over to Excel, because the challenge that I've got here is that while that model is great for doing some dashboarding and reporting work and sharing through Power BI, I've just been tasked with building a forecast, which would be much easier to do in Excel. So I want to import that data model structure and all those measures back into an Excel file. But there's no tool to do that. You can take an Excel workbook with Power Query and Power Pivot and take it to Power BI, super easy. There's a function for that inside Power BI, but not going back the other way. At least, not unless you have Monkey Tools. So here we go. Let's go to Monkey Tools. We're going to go to the Import Export menu, and I'm going to choose to import the BI model from Excel. So I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to choose to import a Power BI model. Now, this is going to ask me to go and find my file, which is going to be right here. I'm going to say Open. There we are. And because the file's already open, this actually went really quick. If the file is not already open, it will actually launch it for you. So you just got to wait for Power BI to load to a certain point, usually right before it starts manifesting visuals. And then it will return to Excel here so that we can actually do the work that we need to do. You'll notice here that it's giving us the option to import it to a new workbook. We also have the ability to import into whatever active workbook we're working on. So why don't I just go and import it to book 1 here. If the item exists right now, I'm going to replace it. There's nothing in here, so that's not a big issue in this particular case. We have the ability to import the queries and the data model and the measures. So this is virtually everything that we can get here. Just the Power Queries, just the data model and measures. So this is basically saying, hey, recreate any relationships for me and build any measures that I need in this particular case. It assumes that the tables already exist. And this is kind of an important factor to think. So if you just want to bring over the data model, just make sure that your tables are already there. Finally, we can also just bring in the measures. If we have all the other structure there as well, again, the tables should exist. That's kind of an important factor here. Now, do you notice in this case, we have a couple of options down here, and both of these are fairly important. Number one, add error handling protection to the data model queries. As we go through and we apply this, what's going to happen is we're going to try and recreate each individual query based on these choices here. There are times when we can't actually load the data because maybe we've got to define privacy levels, or we need to authenticate because we haven't got the proper authentication in place. If that's the case, it could cause your model load or table load to fail, at which point we can't create relationships or store measures on it if it doesn't get created in the data model. So by adding the error handling, it wraps it in an error handler. We actually examine what's going on in Power BI, figure out what the data types of your columns are, and we create a blank table step. And then what we do is we say, try and load the original data, but if it doesn't work, give us the blank table. Because we can create it, we can then do all the other work like creating relationships and measures. So I highly recommend that you leave this on. It just helps add a little bit of data protection into your data model as well. Finally, the generate missing tables with Power Query. This is something so that if you do run into a table, like you can see here, the table metrics was generated not by Power Query, so we can't import it. This will allow us to recreate a Power Query version here so that we can continue on. This is kind of important in this case because this is our metrics table where all of our measures are stored. There's a little bit more verbiage here. I'm not going to belabor that part. What I am going to do is I'm going to click Import, and we're going to let this one run and do its thing. So you can see the queries and connections pane has popped open and it's starting to go and actually create these things. Budgets is just loaded 2,500 rows and it's working through the other connection only queries, building out these queries in their precedent order and adding them all to the file and loading them into the data model. Now, to be fair, this is a fairly big, well, it's not a huge data set. I think there's about 175,000 records in the details table here. This is the biggest one. And it's pulling from SQL Server. Now, fortunately, I've authenticated. We can see that because the data rows are loading, but we do have a little bit of time for this to go through and load all this data. While we do, let's talk about what's not going to come over. Okay, what you'll see here is we're going to load our tables first, then we're going to recreate the relationships, and then we're going to recreate all the measures. And all of that's going to spin through this dialog as we go. But what about things that we cannot import? Power Pivot doesn't have any concept of some of the newer things that have come in, things like calculation groups, for example. So we don't try to import those at all. Relationship types. Of course, Excel Power Pivot supports many-to-one, and that's it. But Power BI supports one-to-one and many-to-many and bidirectional relationship filters. So what we'll do in those cases is we'll actually give you a notification that we couldn't import it. Now you'll notice here that we've gone through, we've imported all of these things. So it's gone through with the tables, we've got all of our individual relationships that have been created, our measures have all been created here. I'm going to close this down and let's take a look at the exceptions that we actually got. So number one, we've got some information here, an empty table created with Power Query. The metrics table was a DAX-based table. Can't even have a DAX-based table in Power Pivot, so we created one with Power Query. We have a bunch of data model columns here, which we could not hide. And the reason for this is because Microsoft does not give me an API to do so. Otherwise, I absolutely would do this for you. So there's a little bit of manual work that you got to do to go and hide these in the data model. In addition, I cannot create sorting hierarchies. Again, I don't have an API for this. So here's a list of the sorting hierarchies that weren't made. Okay, so these are some action items that I've got to go and triage when I go into the data model. Before I do that though, let's take a quick look at the Power Query. I'm going to look at the budgets table. So the original query inside Power BI didn't have the first step or the last step. It went from source, it drilled into this particular table, into the budgets table, it removed some columns and it changed the data type. Okay, so that's what the original query did. What we did is we analyzed this completed table, said, look, we've got our month end is a date, we've got some text, and we've got a dollar value. Never mind the fact that these are numeric. This was set as text in the data model for a reason. So with those kind of things in case here, what we did is we iterated through and we built a blank table. We said, look, you got a currency column called amount. We're going to put a dollar in that if there's no other data. A location code is just going to be missing. Month end, it's a date, so we'll give you today's date and time. The category code, again, is text, so we'll give you missing. So what we do here is on the very final step, we attempt to load the data, but if it doesn't work, privacy levels need to be defined, there's an error of some kind, then we'll give you the blank table output. You can see that here. Try the change type step, otherwise blank table. And this makes sure that we always create those tables. So it just adds a little bit of future-proofing and safety to your model. If anything goes horribly wrong in between here, you can now go and debug and sort that out in order to get the proper table loading with the proper data rows. So I'm going to hit close on that one now. And let's go look at the data model itself. So we'll hop in here. You can see we've got all of our tables have all been set down here. If I go into diagram view, I'm not going to recreate the exact same diagram view that you've got, but what I do want you to notice is that all of the tables are there. They're not laid out exceptionally well, but they are all there. Okay, so you can of course play the game with moving all of your tables around to try and get them into the right place here. I don't really have an algorithm for doing that kind of stuff, but the important part is everything came in, the relationships have all been created because these were all many-to-one relationships that were built there. And now I can go through and start taking action based on the other things in the exceptions list. Now I'm not going to hide all of the unhidden columns, but I am going to grab this metrics one and hide this to make this work as a proper fact table in Excel. So now I'm going to go and close this. And now, just to prove that things actually worked here, pivots and filters from data model. We'll create a new one right here. Let's go and grab, say, our calendar table. Let's put the year on columns. Let's put the month name on rows. Let's go to our metrics and figure out what do we got for sales for all those periods. So there you go. The data has been loaded. The measures have been recreated. The relationships have been recreated. And it works well if you're doing things that do work inside the Excel model. If you've really been pushing the boundaries of new Power BI desktop features for things like calculation groups, this isn't probably going to, well, this will cause you some challenges that you're going to have to resolve. But outside of that, if you're doing, relatively normal type of modeling for Excel worlds in your Power BI, you now have the ability with Monkey Tools to bring it back to Excel so that you can now enrich the model with new queries, new data, and actually do some further, deeper Excel-focused analysis instead of being constrained inside the always rectangular world of Power BI. Thanks for watching this episode of Using Monkey Tools. To get your own monkey, visit our website at monkeytools.ca. Or if you subscribe to Skillwave's Self-Service Business Intelligence Academy, you'll get a free annual pro license included with your subscription. And remember, Monkey Tools was developed to support better Excel and Power BI solutions. If you want to learn how to really master these tools, you should definitely check out our full course catalog at skillwave.training.